What is going on, everybody? I am back today to talk about a movie that I was looking forward to watch because this was on a lot of most slept on indie films of the year so far. I can't remember what magazine or outlet put out a huge review of this, but I read it and was really excited to check it out because of all the comparisons that were being made to this movie. The big one was the HBO television series Girls, which is one of my favorite TV shows I've ever watched. I know Lena Dunham is not the greatest human being, but I really loved that show when it was on air. I thought that it was really effective. It had great character writing. And this was also compared to the likes of Charlie Kaufman or Roy Anderson, who made a film called About Endlessness, which I think is one of the greatest movies of all time, which is essentially just a film of vignettes of people's day-to-day lives and what it's like to just live on this planet and all of the good and the bad that comes with it. And I love slice of life simplistic movies that a lot of people can often refer to as dull. I love Jim Jarmusch's Patterson, even though it's just a slice of life examination of characters. I think when you can portray the human experience in a way that feels uncomfortably realistic, there's something so satisfying about it, where it's it no longer feels like a Hollywood narrative. It feels like you're just watching a person's life. And so that's what I was really hoping to get into with this movie. And the film I'm going to be discussing with you today has an absurdly long title. It's titled The Feeling That Time for Doing Something Has Passed. The Feeling That Time for Doing Something Has Passed is directed by Joanna Arnow. A Brooklyn woman drifts through her life of BDSM encounters, awkward family meetings, and an unsatisfying low-level corporate job. So, as I said, I was really excited to watch this movie, especially with all the films that it was being compared to in television that are some of my favorite movies and some of my favorite television to ever exist. And I hated this movie with every fiber of my being. This was an absolute miserable watch. I feel like this is one of those movies that understands what it wants to say, but has no idea how to effectively communicate it in a way that's thoughtful or a way that's intelligent or a way that's even funny. The humor in this movie was so forced in a way that was irritating. And there's some movies that I felt like that about over the past several years. I talked about a movie not too long ago called The Sweet East, which I felt was one of the most pretentious and just horribly written films I'd seen in a long time. And unfortunately, you can tell the director who also acts in this had a passion for this material. And I hate dogging on people's creative projects, but this was just awful. I could not stand any of it. And I'll talk about the movie as a whole when I break the film down. So at the beginning of the movie, we're introduced to Anne, played by Joanna Arnow, and we see her having multiple sexual experiences with this man that she essentially sees as the leader of their BDSM relationship. I don't know a whole lot. I'm not super familiar with the power dynamics of BDSM relationships, so forgive me, but that's their power dynamic. She wants him to essentially be in charge of her life. And so we get a lot of scenes with just her lying naked and the two of them having conversations together. We get her at family dinners, we get her at her job, and we're just cutting through slice of life portraits of her day-to-day life and then moving through romantic partners while she explores what she wants out of life. And she feels hopeless in her job, she feels hopeless with her family, and so she's trying to find some level of satisfaction somewhere. And the movie is focusing heavily on her wanting this effective BDSM relationship. So as I said, I thought this movie was one of the most miserable experiences I've had watching a film in a long time. I will say, for a positive, it's shot pretty nice. The cinematography and the shot selection is really great. I really like where they place the camera. I think that there's clearly a lot of intentionality with this director and her cinematographer to present the film in the way that it is. The color palette is very dull. The movie is meant to look very bland because there's not very much exciting about this character's life. And that is the most positives that I can say about this movie, because everything else is a nightmare. You could essentially reorganize this movie in any way, shape, or form, and it would play out exactly the same. The character doesn't really have any sort of growth or change whatsoever throughout the entire hour and a half runtime of the movie. She's pretty much in the place that she starts when the movie ends, and you don't really learn much about the character. And that's not to say that you can't have movies where a character doesn't learn a lesson, but I think about Roy Anderson's About about endlessness, which I just referenced, which is just a random series of vignettes of these random characters' lives and experiences. And they're all different things. Like, you just go in there, you could reorganize that movie in multiple different ways as well. But I think there's so much intentionality in the visual presentation and the symbolism of each and every scene that, despite of a lot of it feeling incredibly mundane, it speaks volumes to the human experience and that feeling of like existential dread and loneliness and depression and isolation and all of these things that so many people feel. When you present us with a lead character who is miserable, like there is nothing to like about this character, and give her no personality traits that make her even fun to watch, it makes for a miserable experience. Because turning back to another property that I mentioned, Girls, right? Lena Dunham's character is not super likable. None of the girls in that show are super likable people, but they all have personality traits that make them incredibly fascinating to watch. So even though they're not likable people, it's an entertaining show because of the charisma and because of the comedic timing. Or let's mention another property I brought up, Charlie Kaufman's Synecdoche, New York, one of my favorite movies of all time. Philip Seymour Hoffman's character in that film is not the most likable character, but what makes him interesting is all of his personality traits, the way that he delivers dialogue. There's so much about his character that makes that movie worth watching. And the lead actress slash director here, she's so flat. Like, there's nothing about her character that's interesting. There's nothing about her that really brings life to this film. And in the first 5 minutes, it's like, oh, she's miserable in her existence and she wants a form of escapism. And that's what it is for an hour and a half. And looking in a world like BDSM, you could make this movie really interesting and you could really dive in to the psychology of a person who wants to experience that in their sex life. But they don't even really dive that much into that in this movie. It's just like a series of events occurring on screen that, like, the takeaway is life is hard for some people and it's hard to get out of it even when you look for outlets. And like, I didn't need an hour and a half of bland imagery with poor performances to be able to expand and understand that idea. And like, even the deadpan dialogue delivery, if you want to look something like more popular like Wes Anderson, or even something like Yorgos Lanthimos, where the entire premise of their movies and the entire goal of their films is to have actors deliver dialogue in a very deadpan nature to make the characters easily accessible for people to watch. It's like, so much more about that is the experience and about getting a visceral reaction out of you without like the extreme highs and lows of performance. It's everything surrounding it. But this movie doesn't have that either. It's just like bland sequencing. And the humor in this, oh my god, it was just so miserable to get through. Like, each and every comedic punch, it was like, has this person ever watched any comedy before? Do they understand comedic timing? It was even like the way the words would come out of these actors' mouths. Like, they didn't practice this. It was like everything felt like a first run of dialogue for this shoot. And I was just incredibly irritated from start to finish in this movie. This is hands down one of the worst films I've seen all year. And I'm beyond baffled at some of the positive reviews for this movie. Unless you really like dry, uninteresting humor, I really don't know what you're going to pull from this movie. So have you seen The Feeling That Time for Doing Something Has Passed? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Leave me a comment down below and let me know what you thought. This is one of the worst movies I've seen all year long, and I would not recommend it to anyone. As always, if you can like the video and subscribe to the channel, helps me out a lot and lets me know the type of content you're looking for. I'm always putting out new material and look forward to getting more out for you in the near future. And as always, everyone, thank you so much for watching and have a great rest of your day.